I wanted to talk about the Trial of Galactus trade paperback. It collects about 8 or 9 issues of John Byrne's run on the Fantastic Four from the early 80s. These issues were published between 1982, I believe, and end through 1984. And it's always interesting to go back and read these stories because when you go back and read books when you were, a kid or a teenager, in this case when I was in college, you kind of wonder, like, does it age well? Because a lot of times you go back and you read comics from a while back and it's just not as good as you remembered it. These stories are 40 years old. So let's see. So first, I want to give a thanks to Mike Stevens. Mike Stevens was in a used bookstore during his travels. He travels for work. And he found this at a really great price. And it's from 1989 and it looks brand new. The pages are white. This is printed on Baxter paper. So I want to thank Mike for thinking of me. And I just paid him the money. He picked up and he, shipped them to me. And this is printed on Baxter paper. And back in the day when they switched to Baxter paper, a lot of people didn't like Baxter paper. They wanted newsprint. And I don't know why, because newsprint just doesn't age well. But this is Baxter paper this book was published in 1989. This is Baxter paper from over 30 years ago. And everything is white. The colors are good. I mean, it just looks good. I don't have any complaints with this. The only thing is that some of the glue with the binding is, not sticking as well. But, this is over 30 years old. It includes a page entry from John Byrne. And John Byrne is one of these guys that was really influential to comics. I mean, his runs on Fantastic Four were iconic. He was hired by DC to revamp Superman, which he did. And I just think that a lot of people don't talk about John Byrne because he's a guy that's burned every single bridge he's ever had in comics. I mean, with Marvel, DC, anybody. The last work that he was doing was these interesting kind of Photoshop Star Trek stories where he took images from the original series via Photoshop and then created like new stories from them. And I think he did a long series of issues, but that's the last thing he's done. I mean, he's doing commissions, but he just can't get hired to do comic book work. And it's not for lack of talent. I think he can still draw pretty well. He's coming out with his Elsewhere series. I just think that like a few guys like Jim Shooter too, they just burn so many bridges that they just don't get hired. And because their work isn't presented to new audiences, I think sometimes it's just he's a guy that doesn't get talked about because you don't really hear about him unless people have read him. But you can see in a lot of these pages just the Kirby influence. I'm kind of going out of sequence, but like this is something you can just tell is inspired by Kirby. I'm not saying it looks like Kirby, but just these kind of like one-page panels. And he even said in an interview one time that he wishes that his punches had the same power as Kirby's. But you can see here that John Byrne penciled, inked, and wrote this series for quite a long time. And he didn't skimp on the art. There's a lot of detail that goes on here. And basically, I'll start with the beginning of the story just so you kind of know. So it starts off with this issue where Johnny Storm comes to the apartment of the former roommate of his then girlfriend, Frankie Ray. And they do a flashback story. And basically, Frankie Ray in a previous story is his girlfriend and has like Human Torch powers. I forget how she got them, but she has Human Torch powers. They fight Terrax the Terrible, who was then Herald of Galactus. And what I liked about this story, just to kind of give it like some oomph, is that you include cameos from Spider-Man, Thor when he was old school Don Blake, Tony Stark Iron Man, Daredevil, and the Avengers. This is what I'm talking about, the glue. Oh well. And basically, Terrax has come because Galactus is weak from his hunger, and they kind of want to like destroy Terrax. So here's Frankie Ray, and they had this battle, and basically Terrax wants to like destroy Galactus. Galactus is like, look, man, even though I'm really weak, I can take care of you. So he takes away his power cosmic. He falls apparently to his death, to his death. And then he says, look, you know what? I know I promised you that I'm not going to eat Earth, but I'm really hungry and I'm going to die. So I'm going to like just start feeding on Earth. So then the Avengers get involved here to attack him. And you get to the point where they actually cause him to fall. So after they feed him, he's dying. Rita's like, okay, but it's not up to us to let a guy die, even though he's killed billions of people. So yeah, we're going to have to save Galactus. Because, it's not right to let this guy just die. So they go through this process of saving Galactus, but Galactus still needs a herald. So Johnny Storm's girlfriend becomes Nova. And this is Nova's origin story. And the art here is just, this is so good. I mean, it's, again, pencils, inks, and writing by John Byrne. He doesn't skimp here anywhere. So this is one arc. This is a second arc. And I like some of these pages where it's just Galactus and just one color. I mean, I'm sure it saved him a lot of time, but it looks cool. But then again, John Byrne saved time on that page, but then he drew this page and he had to draw these pages. And, Galactus, and this is when they start really talking more about Galactus' place in the universe. He's talking to Death, and somehow he's like related to Death. And so, and this story is where Nova is like desperate to find Galactus a planet to feed on. So she goes to the Skrull homeworld and she just like decimates the entire fleet that's there, and he just consumes the Skrull throne world. And this is how the Skrull throne world was, annihilated. So then it cuts to Dr. Doom. Apparently there was a storyline where Dr. Doom was ousted by Latveria. Somebody else took it over, and he's back. And he has this plan to use Terrax, who apparently survived, and now he's back to being Tyros the Terrible, and he's going to send them to destroy the Fantastic Four. So he does a really great job of just drawing to scale, like, just showing like how big the thing is, and he does a really great job with the thing. A lot of artists can't draw this character well, and this is the page I spoke about earlier. And overall, even though this is from the early 1980s, it's not super campy. Yeah, it has that Jim Shooter thing of, every comic is somebody's first comic. So you have to kind of like repeat some history and talk about origins and stuff to kind of keep Shooter happy, but it doesn't do too much of that. It isn't as verbose as like a Chris Claremont comic, which, I always say that if Chris Claremont, he always felt like he had a Russian novel in his comics. This has more talking than you would have today, but it's not totally useless. It's not like they're just talking to talk and stating the obvious. Like they're not doing those bubbles like Stan Lee used to do, where Submariner is like on dry land, he's thinking must get water. It's like just like it almost seemed like words just for word's sake. And so here you have him, and he's visiting Avengers Mansion, and Scarlet Witch, I guess old school Scarlet Witch. And so basically the story is that Dr. Doom is saying the Fantastic Four to defeat Tyros, and he's like saying, hey, you're gonna be like, you're gonna kill these guys. The Silver Surfer joins in, and then at the end, Reed Richards is picked up, taken to another planet for a trial. And so the funny part is that at the last issue of this arc, the editor is calling John Byrne, and this is John Byrne, and John Byrne is saying, hey, look, man, like, I don't know, I haven't come up with a story yet, I'm not sure what it is, I haven't come up with a story. So he's calling the FF, because apparently in this universe it's like, well, something established by Stan and Jack, that they write the comics and then they contact the Fantastic Four and they do the comics based on what really happened. So the Watcher reaches out to John Byrne and says, hey, John Byrne, I need you to transcribe these events. So he's actually taking John Byrne to this alien planet and to record the trial of Galactus. And here, Reed Richards makes the case and of saying, well, you know, Galactus, there is a reason for him. And he has that line, he says that line from Albert Einstein, that God does not play at dice. Like saying there is an order to things. So they decide to like bring in a witness to kind of convince the jury that Reed Richards shouldn't be punished for letting Galactus live. And so they summon Eternity. So John Byrne is going full out cosmic here. He's bringing in the Watcher. He's got Galactus. He's got all these alien races, and then he's got Eternity. And Eternity kind of like lets all the people there know like what's Galactus's role in the universe. And they really don't explain it, but they come back and he says, "Hey, look, this is the idea." And they're like, "Hey, man, you know, it's a crazy idea, but okay, we'll go with it." And then that's it. And then there's a little backup story that he did for a Marvel comic where it's Superb Man versus Fantastical Four. And it was like this little kind of like parody story of like Superman with the Fantastic Four. It's kind of funny. But one thing I find interesting about this comic is that like back then, female characters were always written really weak, especially Sue Storm. And even here, she's kind of written like a little weak, almost like they were like damsels in distress. But then later on in this issue, when they find out, Reed's been kidnapped. They're like, "Hey, sis, man, we can't go find him. You know, it's too dangerous. You have a baby on the way." This is when she was having her second pregnancy. She was like, "Hey, I'm in charge of the Fantastic Four now that Reed's gone. I say we're gonna do it, and we're gonna freaking do it." And it showed. And she actually like, when she's like going up against Doom, she's like, she's not being like a damsel in distress. And Doom is like, "Hey, you know, you might be able to fight me. You might be able to like, you know, be on my level as far as fighting, but you know, what are you gonna do? You're gonna choose fighting me or trying to save your family." So he actually empowered Sue a bit, which I liked. That was not common in the '80s for comics, and it wasn't even common until fairly recently. You know, in the '80s, they were just kind of like chase kick. In the '90s, they were like obscene kind of porn stars with like impossible bodies, especially like the Image books. So I like that part of what he wrote. It's a little bit kind of ahead, and that's really it. The art here is really good. It's consistent. It never looks rushed. The story never looks rushed. I mean, he was able to crank this out on a monthly basis for a long period of time is really impressive. He's, you know, like here, there's no background, so they color it just a single color, so it's not white. But then he makes up for it with a lot of detail here. So it's not like he's doing a few shortcuts maybe, but then he's not doing a ton of shortcuts. It's nothing like that one issue of X-Men where every page was white because they were in a snowstorm. It was called Snowblind, and basically every page was white. All you had to do was write it. That's a great gimmick. But again, it's really good. It's not as bad. It aged pretty well, and the story's not bad. I mean, it is superhero fare, but it's not bad, and it is a pivotal story. So it's not one of these pivotal stories that you're reading, you're like, "Oh God, this is terrible." You're reading like, okay, it's not bad. And again, it's John Byrne's a guy who doesn't get a lot of mention because he's hated and despised by most comics publishers. It's a shame. I wish that both parties, him and publishers or publishers, would just kind of like, you know, bury the hatchet and get some work done. Because I mean, you got a lot of the guys that made their bones in this era who are still doing work, and a lot of that work is, I'm sorry, it's bad. You know, you have a lot of guys that were really hot in the early '80s, and you look at what they're doing now, and it's not good. I can't believe that John Byrne can't do at least as badly as they can, if not better, probably better. So again, if you see this, I mean, this is not that expensive. I think on eBay you can find these for $20-25. Maybe you can find it cheaper at a show or a store, but it's not a bad read, actually. And I'm kind of impressed that this is something from the early '80s, which isn't bad, because usually I reserve that for Miller's initial Daredevil run. But again, if you want to read something that came out a long time ago and it's still pretty good, I would say this. And here I just want to show this one page when we're talking about like shortcuts. Yeah, here, yeah, they're just blank panels, so he's not drawing the background. But then he makes up for it by doing all this. So, I mean, the colorist must have wanted to kill him because this is just really, this is a lot going on here. But it's really good. So, you know, he takes shortcuts when he can, but then when he has to really put on the detail, he'll put on the detail. Anyway, I'll try to write about more current books, or books are easier to get. But again, this is not hard to find. You can find this on eBay. I'm thinking 20, 25 bucks. If you're really interested, or maybe a show, or you go to a convention and you can get it for cheaper. Thanks.